What if the words you heard at your first bleed, your first heartbreak, your first birth, your first loss were shaping your nervous system more than you realized? In this episode of Reproductive Rebel, I am joined by master healer Megan Edge to explore how language shapes our feminine rites of passage and why so many of us were initiated through silence, shame, or disconnection instead of reverence. We talked about the power of words as ritual, as medicine, and as a threshold, and what becomes possible when we reclaim our voice at every turning point. This is an invitation to speak your becoming aloud. Hi, I'm Adrienne Irizarry. I'm an East Asian medicine practitioner who is passionate about women's health and helping women to live their best lives. My goal is to put you in the driver's seat of your health, offering holistic solutions for a symptom-free life. Statements made in this program are for educational purposes only and not intended as a substitution for medical consultation or advice. We do not claim to diagnose, treat, or cure any diseases. This podcast is inclusive and welcomes all gender identities. The focus of the program is on biological function, and we will use the term women throughout, but it is referencing physiological and social challenges for biology, not identity. Come as you are, I am happy you're here and welcome all performances of identity. I hope you find something helpful in this show. Welcome back to another episode of the Reproductive Rebel podcast. I am once again joined by the beautiful soul, Megan Edge. Thank you for coming back to the show, Megan.
Thank you for inviting me back to the show. I'm so excited to carry on our amazing conversations.
So if you did not listen to our previous conversation, I invite you to go back and check it out. We had such a juicy conversation. This is how I obviously knew I had to have her back on the show, and she graciously agreed, which I am very grateful for. I feel like we have a lot of really deep topics that we could talk about that all are very profound and affect not only the way women move through the world, but their overall health picture, because emotions and energy are such a big part of our health expression picture. So for those that did not catch our last episode, can you introduce yourself a little bit and then we'll be off and rolling?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm Megan Edge and I'm a master healer. And what does that mean? It means that over the course of the last 30 or 40 years of my life, I have accumulated numerous modalities of healing in order to meet my client where he or she is and be able to offer what is going to be the best fit for them in terms of what they need for their healing journey. I do what I call mind, body, and soul healing. I also teach other women to become mind, body, and soul healers. And with that sort of umbrella modality, what we're looking at is the way in which we hold our story. That's the mind piece. How we think, the words we use to describe our experiences, all of which we have a relationship with. And it can either be a toxic relationship or it can be a really wonderful, beautiful, thriving relationship. And I help people go from a toxic relationship with their stories or themselves to that beautiful, thriving place through the way in which I work with their stories, hold their stories. That's the mind. The body is, of course, about this beautiful temple that carries us through these amazing lives that we lead. And the best ways in which we can be in relationship with this temple, our right relationship with our body, through nutrition, through food as medicine, essential oils, nature as medicine, you name it. If you can put it in or on your body, I know something about it. And then the soul is, of course, that spiritual piece, our connection to the divine, whatever that looks like or however that comes into our lives, whatever that means to us. And again, it's about relationship. I guess you could say I'm a relationship expert in some ways, but it's about the relationship with the self primarily. And what is somebody's relationship with their faith or their beliefs or the divine? Is it good? Is it healthy? Or has there been some trauma there? And so I would do that work as well. So it's a holistic, I guess, three-legged approach to healing. That's in a big nutshell.
I love that. Well, it's so hard to capture that multifaceted experience of true deep healing. And
yeah, it really is.
it really is. Like, I have been fumbling and struggling to come up with a cohesive way of talking about my own work for the same reason. And I've settled on Cycle Alchemist because I feel like it captures the cycles and seasons of a woman's life and how we move through our lives, and then how that works vis-a-vis the nature that we see outside of our window. But it is like, when you're talking about soul level, deep, energetic work, it is really hard to put that into words. And yet when somebody comes through that process, they're like, wow. Like, this was like everything I knew and didn't know that I needed.
Absolutely. And I call it deep and permanent healing. And deep and permanent healing is absolutely possible. And the moment that anybody says to me, well, it's just like, this is the rest of your life now. Oh, you've got diabetes. Oh, you've got PTSD. Oh, it's all Alzheimer's. We know how this goes. I immediately go to the place of, I don't think that's true. Let's find out. Let's question that narrative and discover if maybe somewhere in this world, somewhere in the past, somewhere in the future, someone has figured out that actually this is not your life now, unless you choose that to be your life, that there are other ways in which you can heal. And that holistic approach is what is lacking. It's what is fundamentally missing in our mainstream Western medical model. And
I agree.
one size does not fit all.
Yes.
And I've chanted that from the rooftops I've chanted that for the last 6 years. I've chanted that from the rooftops.
Yes. Well, I was standing on a rooftop too. So like, we might connect here. I've been on rooftops as well. And, you know, it's just interesting because like, a lot of people will use the word holistic and they'll throw it around a lot. But I've found that there's a huge misconception that holistic is natural. And when people are asking for holistic, they're in their brain, they're thinking natural, organic, herbal solution, not whole in its truest sense, meaning, yes, we're going to look at the shadow as well as the light. We're going to like dig into places that make you squirm a little bit and feel uncomfortable. What is that mirroring back to you?
Yes.
Like, that is true holistic healing. And there's such a muddiness. And that's why I kind of wanted to bring this out, tease it out a little bit in what you just said, because what you articulated is what I understand holistic to be. We're looking at the energetic body, the way that we physically show up in the world, our spiritual connection to the divine. Where is it that we don't want to look at things that aren't in alignment because we have to go through some tough stuff in order to come into right relationship? But that journey pays dividends in so many ways versus the way that I feel like it's used in Western culture, which is, I'm looking for something herbal, organic, and natural, but probably offered the way that a pharmaceutical would be.
Exactly. And it's an interesting transition for people who are coming out of that North American model and coming into something that is more holistic. They're embracing it. They still have that conditioning that, okay, well, if a pharmaceutical pill is supposed to save my heart, then a capsule of hawthorn powder should save my heart. So all I have to do is just supplement. All I have to do is replace the pharmaceutical with the supplement, and it should do the same thing. I don't have to do any of the work.
Yes.
And that's not true. And then you get people who say, well, the herbals didn't work. It didn't work. My sister's a prime example of that. I stopped giving her things because I realized she wasn't using them. And I finally one day said to her, why aren't you using any of these things? Well, I tried it once and it didn't make any difference. Okay, well, when you're given a prescription, a medicine prescription, do you just take one of those medicine pills and then it doesn't work and so you don't take them all? No, the doctor says it could take up to 3 months for me to see any change. Okay, so what if you did the same thing with the hawthorn? Let's just pretend like that might make a difference.
Exactly.
And I don't mean to be mocking people who are making that shift because it is a shift.
It is a shift.
But it's a mindset shift. So if you're somebody who wants to no longer be taking the prescription pharmaceuticals and you would like to transition to a more holistic form of healing, then you can start by taking the way that you have taken medications into the way in which you take supplements, vitamins, and other herbal medicines as your first step in extricating yourself from the story of how pharmaceuticals work. Then you start introducing different ideas and concepts of why it is that herbal medicine works differently from pharmaceuticals, which is a whole rabbit hole, and it could be a whole other podcast.
Yes, it absolutely could be. I did an episode a couple of seasons ago called Holistic Medicine is Not a Amazon Prime Kind of Fix. Not only does it not happen instantly, which the lack of instant gratification can be very hard for some people. Yeah. The other piece is like they'll go down the Dr. Google rabbit hole of I'm having this symptom. Oh, this herb will affect this symptom without taking their entire body constitution into account. Yes. And, you know, that's one of the places where I'm like, I love the fact that there's a little bit more openness around embracing herbal medicine. And yet at the same time, there is this understanding that, oh, well, I can just DIY that. Right. And it's like, hold on a second. No, actually, like this is ancient healing that's been passed down generation to generation. This is like thousands of years old. And there have been wisdom keepers who have been like, yes, you can use this herb. However, under these circumstances, it might not be the best fit. Try this. You know, and that's what I studied with the people that I studied with for, is I wanted to find what you couldn't find in a book.
Yes.
And true herbal medicine wisdom holders are just that. They can give you that kind of anecdotal, and that's the juicy part that I lived for.
Absolutely. And that's where the information comes from. And what I find so fascinating is the way in which, and again, this is not an episode about bashing Western medicine, but we're on the topic at the moment, that Western medicine, when medications are being studied, right, when they're going through their trials, they're asking the trial participants to share their experiences in their bodies when taking these medications. That is anecdotal evidence. However, if you use the term with a Western doctor, anecdotal evidence, that will be poo-pooed. So wait, there's a disconnect happening here. How do we learn about medicine? Whatever, it doesn't matter what kind of medicine it is. We learn by our own experience, and then by sharing that experience and recognizing, and here's where there is a disconnect between herbal and Western, or ancient and Western, is that everybody's experience is different. So we're not all going to respond the same way to the heart medication. That's why there's a list of side effects a mile long, because different people have had different experiences with it. Not all of it great.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
And which of these side effects has been litigated? These are the ones that we put in the disclaimer.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So, yeah, it is a mindset shift. What I've seen recently, and I love this, is that what a lot of mainstream doctors and medical systems are now encouraging people to do is to add lifestyle changes to, like, in addition to taking the heart medication or the Alzheimer's drugs or the Parkinson's meds, here are things you can do to actively participate in your well-being and in your healing. And I'm seeing that more and more coming from mainstream medicine. So that's a beautiful fusion where some of the holistic that we're talking about is creeping into some of the very straight and narrow of mainstream medicine. And we're getting a bit of an overlap. We're getting a bridge. And that's great, because those people who wouldn't necessarily listen or hear anything that someone like you or I has to say are going to listen to the white coat and stethoscope. If the white coat and stethoscope says, you know, cut out this and add this and go for a walk and you get off your, at least they're going to listen to that, right? And that'll be a good thing for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It is. It's totally like I sit here as an Aquarius, right, with that very forward future thinking kind of experience. And it's like, well, but this just makes sense to me. And like, I've always been in that position where like I realize the rest of the world has to catch up with me. Yeah. So, you know, my brain is always like several years ahead of where, so like my hope, my dearest, deepest hope is that there will be more of a synergy so that there not only could be more of a conversation between practitioners like you and I and I always love it when I have a traditionally trained doctor who is willing to sit down and have a conversation with me. Because I'm like, these are the conversations that we need to be having for the good of the people that we're serving.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot about like holistic and ancient medicine traditions that really dovetails beautifully in with the feminine experience, because women were the herbal wisdom keepers. We were the midwives. We were the, community herbalists in ancient times. And, there was a lot that we did not only in the care of in the like day to day, but also in celebration of transitions in people's lives as well. And I think that is where a lot of practitioners like you and I are starting to advocate and really bring awareness around some of those practices that have been lost.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As you're saying that, what immediately pops into my mind is I'm remembering when I had my first menses and how my mother, bless her, and I already wasn't afraid. I was already excited for it. I was with a group of girlfriends, like little friends, like, I don't know, we were 12, 13, 14, however old we were. And we were all excited about it. We thought this was going to be a beautiful experience. And because we already had that mindset going in, and where we got it from, Lord only knows. I mean, we're talking now in the 70s. Well, I guess I do know it was coming from the feminist movement of the 70s. It was coming from the representation of women in TV and in corporations. And we were seeing more women moving into sciences and medicine and all those sorts of places. And so I grew up with that excitement, that energy of, we're remembering what we can do and we're moving back into the world in a different way. So that's probably where that excitement came from. When I got my first menses, I was so excited. And I ran home and I told my mom. She said, wonderful. Okay, we're going to have a fabulous dinner tonight to celebrate. And we did. We had lobster, which was my favorite at the time. And I got to have a little bit of red wine to celebrate. And my father and my little brother were there and they were all a part of it. And it was, a toast to, congratulations, here you are. This thing has happened to you. Not this thing, what would we call it? This process has happened to you. And now you're moving into a new phase of being female. It's not going to define me, but it is something that, okay, now I have this responsibility that I didn't have before. Right? That passage into adulthood. And having that experience of being celebrated for that process, so unusual, though not what most young girls experience. I didn't know that at the time. I figured everybody had that experience. It wasn't until I started talking to girlfriends in high school and university where I realized that nobody had that experience but me and my family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I made sure that my daughters both had that experience as well, and that they have a different relationship. I mean, again, we're talking about relationship with self. And a practice that I started when I was in university, and I was very active I was at Halifax in Eastern Canada for university, very active in the women's community there, the spiritual women's community, the goddess community. I was taking women's studies as my major and social work. I started to do a ritual where every month when it was that time, and I would chart it on a moon calendar. I mean, I was full on into this, charted on the moon calendar so I knew when it was coming. I would set aside that day, and that day was a sacred day for me. And that evening, I would run a bath and I would put in beautiful oils and salts and bubbles and things, and I would light red candles and I'd have red wine. And I had a special goblet that I had gotten at a secondhand store that I'd used only for that. So I created this beautiful self-acknowledging ritual and ceremony around getting my period. And I did it every month. So it became a sacred event for me. What if all of our daughters grew up with that? Wouldn't that be something else?
Oh, it would change everything. It would change our self-esteem. It would change the way that we feel about our bleeding times. Because there's so much negative talk, right? Like I remember when I started mine, my mother was very open. There definitely was not a celebration around it, but my mother was open to, so it wasn't like some of my clients who had a box of tampons shoved through the door with the instructions and said, figure it out. Like, it wasn't like that for me. I can definitely say there was a little bit more understanding, compassion, and information in my household, but there definitely wasn't ceremony. That's something that I actively pursued a little while ago, was becoming a sacred menarche mentor.
Oh, beautiful.
Because I really do feel like that is super important. And you're at that phase of your life where like you're trying to figure out who you are, you're figuring out what makes you comfortable and what makes you uncomfortable. You know, this very rapidly changing body can be awkward feeling, and you know, there's a lot of feelings around this, right? So, you know, the narrative when I came into my bleeding years was stick the pad up your sleeve and run to the bathroom so nobody knows kind of thing. And there was like shame around being a bleeding body, maybe not in my house, but socially around me. And so I had this weird relationship with it for quite a while. And I think some of that affected my ability to flow through my life as a feminine energy.
I want to interrupt just for a moment. I love the word that you just used. You know, it got in the way of you flowing through your life as a female entity. And I realized early in the conversation, I used the word period. And I've always wondered, why do we use that word to describe our bleeding? It's not a period. It's not like a little dot of blood on the pad. That's not what it is. It's a flow. It's a shedding. It's a shedding, you know, it's our shedding time, because we came into a fullness of fertility and then we did not receive a seed. And so then we shed what our body doesn't need. That's the cycle right there. So when you use that word, it hindered your flow. Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yes.
And that's why so many women don't flow through their lives. I think we've really hit it with that concept.
I agree. Well, and I'll jokingly say things like the period is actually the beginning of the month, not the end of a sentence or the end of the idea. Because we think that's what like ends our month, instead of looking at it as the opening of a new hormonal month.
Yeah.
So it's like some of the terminology that we use. Gosh, I even see this around perimenopause. I see menopause and perimenopause used interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable at all. Perimenopause is the journey. I mean, menopause is like one day, guys.
There's the word pause.
Yes.
The word pause is in there, which I do love that. I love that it's menopause. We're pausing.
Yes.
We're not stopping everything. We still exist. We are still vibrant and resilient, and we thrive. And yeah, it's just a pause, not the end of the world, everybody.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I mean, but we construct narratives around that, right?
Oh, we sure do. Absolutely.
Like when I first came into my bleed, that was during the Midol commercial era where like it was this whole, like, I remember vividly the woman throwing herself down on the couch and she was having a hard time getting her pants buttoned. And then the voiceover goes, "Are you having bloating? Are you having cramping? Do you feel tired and unable to do your normal activities? Take Midol." And then you see her like pants buttons springing off the couch. She's like, you know, yay big anyway. I'm like, oh, so what did I do when I started having cramps? I thought Midol was going to solve my problem, right? Marketing, man.
Oh, yes.
So like I had this crazy misconception of what a period was actually supposed to be. And collectively, we have been saturated in conversations like that. Like period cramps are synonymous with a period. Having PMS or emotional symptoms, headaches, that is all synonymous with having a period. And it's not. We normalize these things, but they aren't normal. And I think it goes back to your point that how we frame it shapes our relationship with it.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That relationship, the outcome is symptoms.
Exactly. And here's the thing, when we normalize those symptoms and say, well, this is just how it is, every young girl is going to have horrific cramps and bloating and be a complete maniac for 2 days before and 3 days after, or whatever. And we say that's normal. And when the doctor says, no, that's normal, then we don't look for ways to change that. We just accept it as normal. There are countries on this planet where women don't go through that. And they don't go through the horrendous experience that many women in North America have of their menopause. They simply don't. So why are we not looking at what's different about how those women are living their lives and what they're eating, what they're putting in their bodies, how much exercise they're getting? Why aren't we looking at that instead of making it normal so that all of these women, millions and millions of women, are suffering every month with this idea that this is just normal? It's not. It's not normal. It wouldn't make sense evolutionarily for this to be normal, right? To have women be out of commission because they're on the floor cramping and throwing up. No, that wouldn't make does not make a lot of sense. Other mammals don't have that issue, all right? Unless, interestingly, those mammals are exposed to some of the same toxins and endocrine disruptors that we are. Yeah. Then they actually do start to exhibit those same kinds of symptoms. And now we're normalizing that.
Yes. Before we go deeper into this, if you're listening and thinking, I want more of this kind of conversation, the Rebel Frequency Inner Circle is where we continue in. It's a private space with one bonus episode each month, plus small practices and a community of women doing this work in real life. You can join us through the link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. Well, and that extends to fertility too.
Yeah.
Because when I first started doing this work, the miscarriage statistic was 1 in 8 couples were experiencing challenges with infertility. 1 in 4 of those that got pregnant would have a loss. Now we're looking at, speaking of endocrine system disruptors, now it's 1 in 6. And that's been in the last 10 years.
And in the last 4 years, there has been a significant increase in stillbirth and miscarriage. And there's a correlation. We know where that's coming from.
Absolutely.
And the infertility issues as well, for that matter.
Well, and then it changes the narrative, right? So then it becomes your body is something broken that needs to be fixed. And women internalize this conversation that their body is betraying them. And the only person who can quote unquote fix it is the white coat and stethoscope variety of human, rather than really looking at the relationship that they have with their body, the way that their body moves through the world, their relationship to work, their relationship to stress, what it is that they're putting on their body. There's so many things that culturally we have normalized and stand in the way of the healthy feminine flow.
Yes, and stand in the way of the help that is available. If we normalize painful menstrual cycles, then the woman doesn't think to ask for something other than Midol.
Right.
What if there was something you could put on topically, like castor oil packs, to ease the cramping? What if you could ask the question, where's the cramping coming from in the first place, right? What's going on there? What if we look at the hormonal system? We look at the central nervous system. We look at all, and we go back to the story even of the very first menstrual cycle. What was happening in that woman's life at that time? What was her relationship with the masculine as well as the feminine? All those stories and experiences get held in that part of our body. They get held in our root chakra and our sacral, right? Any abuse that's happened, any sexual abuse that's happened, all of that can contribute to a woman's menstrual cycle being a very painful thing. But the point we're trying to make is it doesn't have to be like that if different kinds of questions and expectations are put in place. Same with childbirth, and same with menopause, and then same with death.
Yes. We've medicalized these things so much that we have taken the transition, the rite of passage, the sacredness out of these really big moments in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a tie-in here to the divine feminine, which is that, as you pointed out earlier, it was women up until quite recently, within the last 400 years in Europe, or Europe especially, and more recently in other countries, where the women were the ones who attended the childbirth. The women were the ones who celebrated the menses. The women were the ones who helped each other through the transition from into menopause, whatever we're calling it. I'd like to find a different way to call it, because that's a very medical term. And it was the women who did the transition through the dying process and then taking care of the bodies. And in the Jewish tradition, it is still the women who wash the bodies after they pass and put the shroud over. But what Western medicine did is it masculinized everything. I don't know if that's a word, but it is now. When I was in university, one of my best friends, whose name was also Megan, she decided she wanted to be a funeral director. Bear with me for a moment because this does tie in. She was the first female funeral director in all of Nova Scotia.
Wow.
And quite likely one of the first across Canada, because women were no longer invited into that world. It's the same with the gynecologists, and it's the same with the obstetricians. Women had to fight to become obstetricians, to help other women have babies, because our whole medical system became so masculinized, right? So we're taking that back in various ways. There are now more women doctors, more women surgeons, at least in Canada, than there are men at this point, by a small percentage, but that's the case. And not just nurses. The nurses are amazing and incredible, and we need them, and they should be elevated to much higher status than they are given, unfortunately. But that was the role of women. Women were the caretakers, the keepers of the well-being of the mind, body, and soul of the people in the community. They were the first shamans, right? And that term shaman, by the way, comes from the Scandinavian countries, the Northern European countries. Etymologically, it's not from the southern countries, right? It's a derivative because there's a whole story about the Amanita and the Christmas traditions and the female shamans and the male shamans too, but it was a shared role. And the word shaman coming from, I can't remember now what it is off the top of my head, but the tie-in with St. Nicholas and where Santa Claus and all those words come from. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going off on a few different tangents here, just because there's so much to talk about it. When we talk about the stories that we've lost about our own history, her story, when we find those stories again and we bring them back into our collective consciousness, both for men and women, we begin to heal that relationship. And we see ourselves differently, and we create different expectations for ourselves and our experiences and the value of our experiences, right? We find our voices again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that is it. Right there is the voice. We find our voice again. And if you want to think about this from like a sciencey perspective, using your voice activates your autonomic nervous system. It is critically important to not mute your voice. And yet our stories, her story, has been muted, kept out of the record books, to be seen and not heard in Western culture as women. And it is shifting. The tide is shifting, and more female voices are coming forward. But, you know, just as you're thinking about your health and well-being, your voice is literally a piece of your health picture, and it's incredibly important to keep that in mind.
Yes, yes. And the words that you choose to use be so healing. And I'd love to share a reframe for women around childbirth, if I may.
Absolutely.
We've got time for that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It came out of my own experience. So my first birth, it was a very fast birth, but very difficult. And there were complications afterwards. But I birthed a beautiful baby, did it vaginally. Everything was fine in the end. Then there was a miscarriage in between. And then I had my third pregnancy. And we get to the time of delivery. We're getting close to delivery. And it turns out that she had turned herself upside down and she was going into a breech birth, a bum birth. And we tried to change her manually. That didn't work. And so then we were faced with, you're going to have to schedule a cesarean, right? And I was okay with it because I knew anyway, if the baby's born and mom and babe are healthy, that's fine. I didn't have a lot tied up in the way in which the birthing happened. But afterwards, I remember thinking, okay, but hang on, cesarean section, C-section, cesarean, that comes from Caesar. So then I started doing some research. And yes, as a matter of fact, it does. Because Caesar's wife, and Penelope, I think, we'll have to check that just to make sure that I've got her name right, or whatever the Romanized version of it was. She was one of the first documented cases in Western medicine of a baby being born from having the belly cut open and the baby taken out. And I don't know that she survived or not. I can't remember that exactly. We'll have to find those details. Anyhow, the long and the short of it was that Caesar got the accolades. And so it was called a cesarean section, not a Penelope section, or whatever her name was. Hang on a second. That's not okay. That is not okay. And I've worked with a lot of women, a lot of my clients who've equally had that kind of a birth, and I've had real difficulties with coming to terms with that they didn't do it right, they didn't do it properly, they didn't have the correct kind of birthing. And there's all the recovery afterwards. Well, as I was sitting in bed recovering and I've got my beautiful little baby in my arms, I thought, that was a belly birth. That's a belly birth. I had a belly birth. So I started using that terminology to describe it. And it was so interesting to experience how often someone would reflect back to me, not having heard that I just said belly birth. And, oh, so you had a C-section? No, I had a belly birth. Right. So when you had your C-section, but once somebody heard it, it changed everything for them. And my midwife, I had midwives helping me with my births. And when I told her this, she almost started crying. She said, I've been waiting for someone to create a new way of relating to this experience. I'm bringing that into my practice.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I mean, words are so powerful.
So powerful.
They're so powerful. And it's like, when you say things like my body betrayed me, the body will continue to show up in the way that you're setting the expectation for.
Yeah.
When you reframe things like this was a belly birth or my body did this really well today, like that changes everything. It changes your frequency that you're holding. It changes the way your body expresses itself. It changes your relationship with the experience. Like when I talk to people about my birthing experience with my son, I talk about stepping through the birth portal and how I came out the other side forever changed. And it doesn't matter how many times you have given birth, it does. Birth is a powerful, transformative experience, and it changes you. No matter how you birth your baby, you are cellular, biochemically shifting into a different version of you. And there's been a lot of re-envisioning that has followed that in terms of how I talk about myself, my work, how I do my work, how I articulate my work, all of that, because I am different as a result of it. And it's the same thing with perimenopause. Like you are, if you want to talk about it in a sciencey way, your whole neural network is rewiring itself because your primary receptors in your brain have been wired for estrogen. And as the alchemical soup of hormones that you have in your body, those dynamics begin changing. The function of your brain changes. It's not a bad thing. It is a powerful, transformative portal in your life into the next book, not just a chapter, but the next book of your life. Because once you have gone through this process, you will move through the world differently. And it's not a bad thing. It is a really powerful moment in your life. And when we focus on the symptoms, often
we look at them as things that are standing as roadblocks rather than the body's way of communicating, hey, you're out of integrity somewhere. What have you not been voicing? What have you not been truthful to yourself, to others around you? What have you done to keep other people comfortable and be smaller than you are? And that is where those symptoms come from.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating is that when we look at statistics of when are women most likely to walk out of a marriage that is no longer serving them, between 45 and 55. What happens between 45 and 55 for many women? That's the shift. So something changes in their perception, and like you're just describing with the way in which their brain is working, their neural pathways are changing, and they're less tolerant of many of the things that they've spent decades tolerating in order to be whatever the story is, the good wife, the good mother, the good friend, the good daughter. It starts to shift. And women very often find their voices. They wake up in there between 45 and 55 in that realm and begin to talk again, begin to stand up again on the rooftops like we were talking about earlier before we started, I think. And it's just such a fascinating shift. Then we have this thing called a hysterectomy. The word hysterectomy comes from the word hysteria. Of course it does. Yes, it does. And male doctors found at the turn of the century-ish, that if they removed the uterus in older women, that hysteria of the woman finding her voice and finally standing up and saying, thank you, but I'm out of here, or I've got things to say, would diminish. So there's a connection. Right? And hysteria is an ancient word that comes from basically losing oneself in religious or spiritual ecstasy. And there's a goddess, I'm not going to say her name right, Hestius or something like that. And I don't mean the Roman god of the forge, it's a different person altogether. But she was the goddess of women's emotions and women's passions. So you see this thread coming through in the use of the word, but not only the use of the word, the use of changing a woman's body to keep her pliable and acceptable to society. Right? Crazy.
It's absolutely crazy. And the ways that we've been controlled.
And the idea that, well, we're no longer bearing children, so we don't need a womb anymore anyways. We can just take it out. It's just a dead organ now, and it doesn't serve any purpose, except that it sure does. It still continues to create hormones. It still continues to be an integral part of our whole system, right? And the rate of scheduled hysterectomies and the rate of scheduled belly births is frightening how high that is. And it's happening more and more in Canada as well now, where birth is being scheduled, menopause is being scheduled, death is being scheduled. We have MAID up here now, which is medical assistance in dying. And while there's a real empowerment around choosing one's own death, I really do feel strongly about that, and I always have. The way in which this is being offered to people who would otherwise perhaps have chosen a natural death, it's being really pushed on. There's an agenda that's happening. And the number of people who are going through this is every year it's climbing. I think it was 64,000 people last year chose MAID. And again, there's the empowerment piece of that, but many of them didn't really choose it. And I work a lot with clients who have been given cancer diagnoses. And I either work with them where they are. If they're choosing to do chemo and radiation, I will support them with the herbs and the oils that can help their body manage that. Or I help them with the cancer with the herbs and the oils that can help them with that. The number of stories I've heard of within the same conversation of, yes, you have fill in the blank cancer and you should consider MAID.
Wow.
One of my friends recorded her oncologist. I listened to the recording. She said, well, hang on a second, because he wanted to schedule her immediately for chemo and radiation. She said, whoa, like I just got the news. I need to digest this. I want to see what else is out there and is available. And he said, oh, well, if you're going to do that, then you should choose MAID.
Wow.
If you're not going to do radiation, and if you're going to question radiation and chemotherapy, then there's no point. You should just do MAID. You should just kill yourself.
Wow. That is
God.
crazy. Yeah, see, we have like some states that allow that and some that do not. And there are states that are voting on it because here in the States, we've become a little bit of the Wild West in that it's a state by state decision depending on how we're going to regulate people's bodies these days.
Yeah.
All sarcasm intended. So, when we're looking at these kinds of transitions, like I had the absolutely beautiful opportunity and gift, really, to help someone who chose a more holistic way of moving through her cancer diagnosis. And I cared for her right up until she passed. And she saw her journey very much as a transformational gift to learn lessons that she needed and to process energy that she needed to. And, I had the opportunity to help her using frequency and with oils to transition peacefully through the whole process. And, going that route, she lived probably close to 2 years longer than they had given her in her original diagnosis. And she really didn't suffer. It was just the last couple of weeks that her body started to shut down. And I saw the signs of it ahead of time and we worked through the process. And, when you were talking about how women used to be the death doulas and the midwives of that process, really, it was very meaningful to me to hear it worded that way, because I don't think a lot of people think of it that way. I think a lot of people in Western culture are afraid of it, which is why we don't want to look it in the face and recognize it as another stage of energetic transition in our process here. And so there can be a lot of beauty in midwifing that and supporting that phase in a person's life.
It is such a sacred duty. And I had the first opportunity to participate in that with my father's death.
Oh, wow.
We had to make the decision, the family, to take him off life support. And for the 2 weeks that he was in the ICU, and then the 2 or 3 weeks that he had heart surgery that went poorly, that he was in the hospital, I was coming in every day with my oils and my diffusers and my massage and my food as medicine. And he said to me, Megan, this is what the hospital needs. They need people like you to come in and do this work. And he hadn't really been a true believer in a lot of the alternative work that I do necessarily, but he got to experience it firsthand. And when we knew we were going to take him off life support, I said to my stepmother and my brother, because the three of us were going to be there to be witness, to bear witness to his passing. I had done some research the night before. I wanted to know what to look for in his physical body. And so I'd seen and read what was going to happen and how his color would change. And he had a pacemaker, so his heart didn't stop naturally, even once they'd taken him off the life support, but his body went through the process. And he did in fact pass, even though the pacemaker was still on. That moment of transition, of holding I had my hand on his heart. My stepmother, his wife, was across from me, and I think my brother was down at his feet. And in that configuration, we were honoring what people have done for millions of years in our own evolution, which is to hold the moment of a person's transition from life to death. And it was such a profound experience. And I love that it was my stepmother and I, that we were the women there. And it was beautiful that my brother was there as well, but it was significant that it was the women who were there. So today, as we're having this conversation, one of my clients is currently dying in the hospital, and she's got hours to live at this point. And I was there this morning with her son, and I've looked after this woman for the last 2 years. She's become a dear friend of mine. I offered to him that he and his stepsister might want to do some ceremony around her passing. And I suggested go out into her garden, pick some rosemary. If there's a rose blooming, grab that as well. And I gave him a roller with some essential oils in it that are beautiful for this kind of work. I said, anoint her. If this feels good for you to do for her. And she's a beautiful artist. She's the most incredible artist. So feels like it would have been. So that's what he's going to do. That's what they're going to do. And it didn't occur to him before. But he's also never seen anyone die before because it's not something we see.
Right.
It happens elsewhere. It doesn't happen in front of us very often, you know?
Yeah.
So bringing back that gentleness and that sacredness for all of these passages that we go through and bringing it in with the divine feminine, because it is the female caretaking energy that has always been part of that until so recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
She is so fortunate to not only have had your light in her life, but to have this kind of support as she transitions, because that's one thing that I found incredibly profound and meaningful in the palliative care opportunity that I have had over the last 2 years. She passed away this past June, is that I was able to witness her in all of those stages and watching the elements start to unwind as she was getting closer, the walks down memory lane, the, all of those kinds of things. Like, it was really special to be able to hold that space. And really, when we're at the end of our life, that's what people want, is to have somebody witness their life and what they've done while they're here.
And it is sacred and it's profound. And it changes, again, we're talking about relationship. It changes our relationship with the idea of death and what comes next. And many nurses who work in palliative and doctors who work in palliative, they all report similar situations that when someone is ready to die, they get really calm. They're not afraid. They're not afraid. They might have been afraid their whole life of death, but they're not afraid. And that's when they know they're ready, is when they're not afraid.
Well, it's a little bit like birth, though, too, if you think about it. Yes. Like when you get to that point where you are so pregnant and maybe you have absolutely loved every minute of your pregnancy, but then all of a sudden you reach that, okay, baby, it's time. And like when you get to that point, because like with my son and my daughter too, I actually really loved being pregnant. And my midwife joked that at the very end, it was that I was just like, I was crying because I was like, I'm not ready to not be pregnant with this baby anymore. And she goes, oh, you'll get there. And then it was like the next week, I was like, get this baby. So, like, I am ready. And I say that jokingly, but it's true. Like, there is this energetic shift. We see this in transition during birth as well.
Yeah.
Where, maybe you've been laughing and joking and cracking jokes and like everything's like all fun and light and whatever. And then you reach that moment of, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
And that's
lock in.
just before your baby comes earthside, And so we have so many of these moments that we look upon in our culture as things that need to be fixed or managed. Just thinking about the whole culture around death and that organization that you were talking about, like there's so much that is scheduled because we have enough of a trauma response to these topics, or we've been saturated in a culture that makes us think that being out of control something that needs to be controlled.
Right.
And yet, every single one of these transitions in our lives, whether it is the coming of the first cycle, the arrival of a baby, our transition across the perimenopausal threshold, moving into the afterlife, all of them require surrender.
Yeah. And to that, I would also add, when a choice is made for a baby not to come into the world.
Yep.
That is also it's a sacred act. And if it's done with consciousness and intention for it to be something beautiful and supportive because the woman has chosen that this is not the right time or place, right? That's incredibly empowering. And there's something really beautiful about reclaiming bodily sovereignty around that and the choices that we should be able to make for our bodies.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. That is a Roe versus Wade hill here in the United States that
I know.
absolutely could die.
Yeah.
It gets more entertaining all the time. So, yeah, it is. It's a total reframing around the stages of life and the way that we move through the seasons and cycles of our life and understanding that's exactly what they are, season cycles, and that nature never rushes and yet everything gets done. It's one of my favorite quotes. And Lao Tzu, smart dude. So like, I have to remind myself of that because I used to be a push and run kind of person and realize that, okay, this is why I'm having symptoms in my body and this isn't working for me. And you know, if you take anything away from this conversation, my deepest hope is that there is a reframing with the relationship that you have with your body that reframing can transform your relationship with your health picture.
It's so powerful. And most importantly, that each one of us has that inner power within us to do that work. What I always say to people is words are free.
Yes.
You don't need a prescription to change your language. You don't need a doctor's permission to stop saying, I keep forgetting and I have the worst luck, to I always remember and I have great luck. You can do it and then you can say it. And the more you say it, the more your brain changes and then it becomes true.
Yes.
It becomes real. That's free. Anybody can do it. You just have to do it. That's all.
Exactly. You have to make that commitment.
Got to make the commitment
yourself and what it is that you really, truly want.
Yeah.
So if you were to leave our audience with a final thought, what would that be?
I guess what I just said, you can do it. And I don't mean in the Nike way.
More like in the little engine that could way.
Yeah.
You can do it.
I love that book. Oh, I used to read that all the time when I was little. My grandfather gave me a copy and we would read it together. And that image of the little train, I know I can. Goes up there. Oh, that's a perfect analogy to leave people with. You can. I'm covered in goosebumps as we say that. You actually can do it. That's it. No excuses. You can do it.
And if you don't know what book I'm referring to, it is a kid's book. It was one of my favorite books also when I was a kid. The Little Engine That Could. I think I can. I think I can. I know I can. I know I can. And it's a little bit at a time. There was a movie in the late 80s, early 90s, What About Bob? And it was like baby steps to the refrigerator, Bob. Baby steps to the counter, Bob, right? Because the therapist was like trying to get him to like push outside of this comfort zone. And it's the same idea, you know, I think I can, I think I can, I know I can, I know I can. And,
I can. Yeah.
You know, it might just be writing down a couple of things in a journal and you're saying the same things to yourself day in and day out. I think a mirror can be a really powerful way to do that. When you're looking yourself in the eyeballs and saying, I can, I will, I am. It is, you know, like it is already here.
Yeah.
And where you feel that little uts inside of your body, that's where you're looking to create right relationship between what you want and what you believe on the inside. And that is where right relationship really comes from. So I am so grateful that you came on the show again and shared your beautiful wisdom and energy. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. It has been such a gift, Megan. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're so very welcome. And thank you as well for this amazing space that you hold for us to have these kinds of conversations. It's so important.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. It's one of my deepest hopes and wishes for this show. So thank you. I appreciate that. And until next time, everybody. If you're listening to this and feel like there's still something here for you, like the conversation isn't quite finished in your body yet, That's exactly why I created the Rebel Frequency Inner Circle. It's a private space where we go deeper, with one bonus episode each month, small ritual practices, and a community of women who are actually living this work. It's just $5 a month. You can join through the link in the show notes. Come stay in the conversation.